Hi, listeners. Welcome to It's the People, our interview series where we explore the inside story of building companies and investment portfolios with high-octane founders, limited partners, and fund managers. We hope these conversations push you to be even better at what you do. In this episode, my teammate Wills Halfworth and I, Lara, had the opportunity to interview Krystle Mobayeni. Krystle is the CEO and co-founder of BentoBox, a marketing and commerce software platform for the restaurant industry that she sold to Fiserv in 2021 with a 9-figure exit. Krystle is a first-generation Iranian with decades of experience as a designer, and both elements have played key roles in her early professional success. In our conversation, we discussed a range of topics, including the importance of showing and not telling, how critical it is to have evidence that people are willing to pay upfront for what you're building, key insights on how to build a great team, the awareness and expectations that come along with raising investment capital, her advice on having a successful exit, and much, much more. To start things off, Krystle begins the conversation with her life story in 60 seconds. Before we begin, we'd like to note that this interview is for informational purposes only, and that the opinions expressed should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. TIA Ventures is a seed-stage fund focusing primarily on early-stage business-to-business technology companies, with an obsessive focus on end customers and early teams.
To start this off, we'd love it if you could give us the Krystle story, the 60-second Krystle life story. You can go over a little bit if you have to, but maybe walk us through kind of your background and in particular, if there's any key moments that jumped out, from, your life that you think were like very impactful to the path that you ultimately defined, and we can go from there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Krystle Mobayeni, co-founder and CEO of BentoBox. I am a first-generation American. My parents are from Iran. That played a very important role growing up in my life, which I'll touch on. But grew up in the DC area. Was always kind of a little entrepreneurial. I was really got into sewing and was, in elementary school making clothes for my friends and selling it, and just always had like a little like side hustle even at a very young age. And then growing up, being first generation American, I feel like there was this idea of this like third culture in my household, and for me, that third culture kind of really developed at restaurants with my family. And so restaurants always played a really important role in my life. And as I got older, got really, my father was majored in computer science, back in like the 70s and 80s, before that wasn't even a thing. So technology always played like an important role in my life, and as did design. And so as digital design and graphic design became a thing, I ended up going to school for that in Philadelphia, which really opened up the path to being a web designer, digital designer, once I finished school, and going down that path. And was working on just digital products for the first part of my career for different agencies and different brands. And that evolved into working with restaurants on their digital presence, which evolved into BentoBox. So it was a very natural evolution.
I love it. And you hit on a bunch of things there. I'd love to ask you just a very blunt question, if I may, Krystle. So you went to Philadelphia University, studied design. This was in the early 2000s. I'm guessing Philadelphia University at the time wasn't a hotbed for starting companies.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't maybe have like a full-fledged entrepreneurship ecosystem. You mentioned your first generation, female founders we know and can see. I don't think your family was entrepreneurial. Like your father, it sounds like, was in comp sci, but wasn't necessarily entrepreneurial. We know you to be, I'd say, like a quieter, less assuming, not quite type A personality from maybe some of the other entrepreneurs that we've interacted with. And yet you built a tech company from scratch that you sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. How the hell did you do it? Like, I know there's probably a lot of aspects to that, but like how, given your background, how did you do what you did?
Well, I mean, even though I'm not as extroverted, I would say that you ask anyone that like really knows me, I'm quite type A,
Okay.
I am the leader in anything, from, you know, what wine we're gonna drink if we're out to dinner, to where my husband and I are going to vacation. And, there is a lot of that exists, but I am I'm just less extroverted, so I do think that in that sense, I probably looked a lot less like the very high visibility kind of founder CEOs that we've seen over the past like 10, 15 years. But for me, I've always just had like, I think I know what great work looks like, and I know what good looks like. I've always had like a very high bar, and that like kind of design quality background comes into play. And then I just think that there's like I think that many first generation Americans probably feel this. There's sort of like a must succeed, cannot fail, like need to capitalize on this opportunity that was created for me, because I could have had a very different life, just like a couple different decisions that my parents could have made. And can you even imagine, just being like in Iran right now? I mean, it's totally different. I would have had a totally different life. And so I think that it's just always been, it's never been an option to not do something big and something great. And I just knew that was like, the best way that I could say like, thank you to my family for what they gave me, So, it's always been very ingrained. And then I think I chose to do something for an industry I really love, and so which made it easier.
Mm-hmm.
I think like if you're solving a problem, you can't just start a company and just, work on something that you don't want to get up and do, even when it's like really, really hard, because it's going to be very hard. And you just have to love it, even when it's awful,
Yep.
So
if I could just, that comment about kind of high visibility, like, I think you said, I'm the person who's choosing what we're drinking, in terms of wine. I just may not be as visible or as extroverted as some of the, people that we've seen. I'm curious, like, do you think that, because your story is truly exceptional, like there's not a lot of people who have done what you've done. And yet you look around online of interviews and content that's been produced, and there isn't as much about you, I'd say, and do you think that there's some reason behind that? Just kind of what it is about your nature, or like any thoughts around why? Because your story is truly exceptional. It's like, there's not many of them.
Yeah, I'm sure it's my nature. I think I'm just like a much more private person. I think I'm just less, I don't know, boisterous. Like I don't know. I'm much more of like a show don't tell type of person. Like just do the great work, don't talk about the great work. So yeah, I think it has everything to do with my nature. And I think towards the end of BentoBox, like the last couple of years, we did just start getting so much more coverage. And I just hired an amazing marketing person that was just also like, just, really got my story out there, got me out there, got, entered us into things, just put us all into the right places. And, it was very uncomfortable at first, but I think it was important that she did that. And I'm like very grateful that she had that foresight and initiative to like kind of push a bit outside of my comfort zone.
And just on this point, like, do you think that this translated to how you led? Like the style of leadership that led to be very effective for you?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. I think that I I've hired people, as at least like people that were in my direct line of reporting, that I think were like self-starters, adults, could operate in ambiguity. There was a lot of trust and a lot of ownership there then as well from those people. I don't think that anybody felt micromanaged ever. I think there's certain things that they knew that I had very strong opinions about, but those were always very clear. But they were truly the experts of their own domain. So I think it just created a lot of autonomy and therefore ownership and therefore like accountability among people. And I think that kind of trickled down.
It seems like one of the success factors of building your company were the people that you worked with and building the right team. How did you know how to hire these people or find the right people?
Well, finding people is very hard. But I think that there were things that I had a co-founder who's technical, as well as the CTO, Pierre, who's amazing. And between the two of us, there were just some very obvious gaps, in whether it was like, go to market or customer success, or there was just operations. So it was very easy to first like know how to fill those gaps. There were obviously things you have to do everything in the beginning. Everyone's doing everything. But there's obviously the things that you find yourself procrastinating or not enjoying because they're just not like your go-tos, and spending all your time on the things that come easier, or that you have interest in or experience in, or the answers to. So it was really, for us, like very obvious the gaps that needed to be filled first, and then more like broad strokes. You're hiring generalists. You're hiring like I remember the person that we hired, who was one of the first people we hired, who really owned all kind of go to market. Like he did, it was a little bit of marketing, but sales and business development. And he's still with us today, but is much more focused on just partnerships and business development. But in the beginning, he was like very much a generalist, and he could do all of it. So I think that was like really important to make sure there were people that weren't so hyper specialized that they couldn't flex up and down. And I think that was the most important thing. And then it was also people that just like, again, because we were focused on a very specific industry and a specific problem, I think it was easier to be able to pinpoint people with a passion for this particular thing. Like the individual that I just mentioned, ran a wine business and in the south of France before like he got into like tech and startups. And so everyone was like connected to like the problem we were solving, which just made it so much more fun in the early days.
Krystle, I'm curious, that concept of filling gaps, it seemed obvious to you that they had to be filled, and they had to be filled by, people who you described as self-starters. They knew the territory, what they were doing. And I'd argue that's like we work with a lot of first-time founders, and sometimes it's not obvious that that's what should be done. Did you do this out of the gate? Or did you sort of learn the hard way, or did you already have an instinct around how to build a team that could get to this promised land, the success? Like,
I mean, I didn't have an instinct. I just knew what I wasn't good at. I just knew like what I didn't want to do and wasn't good at. I think that there's like also the flip side of that is I probably held on to things that that I liked doing, that at some point I wasn't like, there was someone out there that could do it way better than me, like product, for example, design or things like that, that I probably held on to for too long because I thought like, because it was my thing, but obviously somebody who's done that at scale and seen best practices. And, I had 5 million other things happening as well. So I think that there's being able to spot the gaps for me was easier, but then being able to let go of the things that I actually really like to do turned out to be the harder part.
Is there something right now that you'd say, hey, I'm holding on to this and I know I need to let go of it? And like, how you know when to let go?
I don't think so at this point at all. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think like maybe a little more philosophically now that we're, part of a larger organization, there's probably a lot of letting go of like, it's different. And there's a lot of good that comes with it being different, being part of a large company, a large, having access to everything that Fiserv and Clover have that we're part of now. But then also wanting to maintain all of the magic that got us to where we are. So I think that there's probably a little bit more of like a higher level letting go. But in terms of my role itself, I just feel like it's been long enough that I'm like very excited over things.
Have you learned like what is the absolute best use of your time and skill?
Yeah, I think that the being very clear, like I think that like I have a really putting together like a vision and strategy and narrative comes very easy to me. I can like put it together in my mind and I can see it very clearly. And I think that it's very focused and prioritized and clear. And my time is best spent figuring out all the different ways to communicate that and put it on paper and figure out how it applies to like every function and how it applies to like how we're going to hit goals. And just making sure that I am like repeating that and reiterating that in the multiple ways so people understand how it connects to the job they're doing and connects them to that other person doing the job over there, connects them to our product, to our customer. I think that's very clearly and obviously the best use of my time. And one part of it comes easy, which is coming up with it and knowing it, but then making sure that I'm constantly over communicating it and finding ways to, when someone's struggling, bring it back into that. Or if we're struggling as a company, bringing it back to that. It's kind of the part that's like, I have to be a little more proactive about, I think probably because of the, introverted nature.
How has your application of those skills transformed between running a startup and now a sort of corporation?
I think that in a startup, it could be a lot more ad hoc and a bit more aspirational. But not just like being part of a corporation, but just as the business got more sophisticated and we had like years of history and years of data and numbers and performance, just even as that happened, it became a little bit more like how that gets applied needs to be rooted in what's like actually happening historically and like where we're going, that has a little bit more of a quantified aspect to it, which I actually kind of liked because there was certainty in that. And there was something more to like grasp onto, where in the beginning, even though it is very vision-y, it feels a little bit more like, a little salesy, but when you can like tie it to facts and past performance and future performance, it just makes it a bit more tangible and easier to grasp onto. So that's kind of, I think, the way that it's evolved over time.
It's interesting to hear this because, we work with founders who are able, to kind of build their businesses up into, build their startups up into real businesses. And sometimes what we've seen is the person who was there to start it could probably figure out how to do the next stage, but it's not necessarily the thing that, they're passionate about or gets them excited or out of bed. And in some cases, it starts to feel like a chore. We actually just interviewed one of our other founders who talked about, when you start to dread Monday morning, probably means that you should think about a change. And if what I'm hearing is like, you've kind of opened the door to something that you're as excited about, if not more so than like, as far as what BentoBox is right now, your role there and where it's going. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a lot that I'm really excited about. And I've never done anything at the scale. Like, it's very interesting. Like, I feel like when we got acquired, we went from being, a certain kind of like growth stage startup at the beginning of that to like being part of like a, company that's like an, 60, 70 billion dollar market cap. And it's a public company. It's 40,000 people, works with like 200,000 restaurants. Like, and that operating at that scale is very intriguing to me, or just learning how to do it. I really like learning how to get good at things that I'm that are new, or that like I haven't flexed that muscle before. So yeah, I think I think that natural curiosity that probably got really supported the growth of BentoBox is also serving me well today and keeping me engaged, even though the environment is just so different. So different. But I'm learning a lot. And I think that's, and I don't know how I've never had that kind of experience before. So it's good.
And I know we've talked kind of about BentoBox by name, and for our listeners, I'm guessing this is something that comes very naturally to you now, but do you mind just giving kind of a quick thumbnail sketch about what exactly BentoBox is, what the company does?
Yeah. So at a really high level, we help restaurants grow their business online. And the way we do that is we start with their online presence, which is their website, and we help them transform that into a digital storefront that actually drives revenue online the same way they do on premise as well. And we do that through a toolkit that includes online ordering, gift cards, catering, ways to sell tickets, just various restaurant-specific e-commerce that's then supported by like marketing automation that's built just for restaurants.
When you initially launched BentoBox, did you launch it with all these toolkits, or was it initially one thing and then that led to the next component once they requested it?
Yeah, I mean, it started with websites, and it started that way because that's kind of what I did before I started BentoBox. But the ambition was always that it was going to go beyond that, and that there was a lot of opportunity beyond that, just helping restaurants just digitize and become just more technology forward. And specifically, I don't think this was very obvious in the beginning, but over time, specifically in the way that they interact with their diners, I think was a big focus area. How does a restaurant utilize technology to deepen the relationship with their diner versus what they felt like was kind of taking them away from their diner? And it became very clear that restaurants were very like cost conscious. And so a natural evolution from the website, which was a cost to them, was to make sure that their website was making them money. So we were like a not a cost center. We were actually like driving them revenue. And then that made it a lot easier to be able to like sell in more products. And yeah,
That's a really interesting perspective.
yeah.
That concept of deepening the relationship with the guests, I think about a few of our portfolio companies where, like a company, we have a company called Trajectory in the portfolio, or it's now called Leal. And the founder, they're focused in kind of cancer clinical trials, but what's made them truly differentiated, and I think what's led to their success, was it was all about the patient. It wasn't about the pharma. It wasn't about the oncologist. It was about building product, looking through the patient's eyes. And we've seen this in a couple other instances. Was this always at the forefront of your mind or the team's mind? Like, hey, it's about the guest.
I like. I don't think it was like obvious at first. But I think once it took a few years for it to become clear that it was a big differentiator that we were kind of doubling down on. But I think that it was a bit like inherent in what we were doing, because my background being design is like, it's not really about aesthetics. I mean, it is, but it's really about design. It's about people, and it's about supporting behaviors, and it's about inspiring action. That's like what design is, versus like art, which is like a little bit more like subjective. Like design has like an actual purpose. And so I think that people-centric nature of design kind of pushed us in the direction of it being about how restaurants like serve their diners. So I think it all kind of fits together and makes sense, but it wasn't obvious at first. It kind of had to be drawn out a little bit.
So before doing BentoBox, I sort of LinkedIn stalked you, and I saw that you had an agency that was called Neon and Sons, and I think you did that for about 6 years. What led you to deviate from that and start this company called BentoBox? Why not continue the agency?
Yeah, I mean, it really was an evolution, and it was a very small agency. It was like, kind of like one step above freelancing. It was like a conglomerate of like freelancers, led by me. But, basically it was like the work. I got a few restaurant clients, and we were doing their websites, and it just now evolved into, okay, well, we did that one restaurant's website. Now, like, this other restaurant wants kind of the same thing. And then now this other restaurant, which is like a big name, wants the same thing. And it's all the same set of features that they want. And like, we could productize this, and it just evolved into that very, very naturally. So
did you use any of those clients to sell your initial bento boxes to?
yeah, I mean, there was one website that the very first restaurant website I did was I did it on WordPress, and then 2 others came up around the same time, and I put together like, agency proposals that we were going to do it on WordPress. But then I was like, as I was doing the proposals, I was like, wait, like this is the same thing, and it's going to cost like so much to customize WordPress to do what they want. And I think that it would just be easier if we just built a platform from scratch that would do exactly what they wanted. I could do it at the same effort that it was going to take to customize WordPress, and just WordPress at that time just was so cumbersome to work with. And so to those 2 restaurants, I remember I said to them, I'm going to charge you less and build this platform for it. And you'll be the first ones on it. And that's that. And they were like, okay, cost less. Sure. Seems good. and that's how it started.
Krystle, you make it sound really easy. We know that we often talk about this graveyard of agency businesses that try to become product companies.
Right.
To your point, like, I've now done projects for 15 restaurants, and they all look pretty similar. And yet so many companies, I think, try to go from agency to product unsuccessfully. And I don't know if this resonates with you, but like, do you think, were there certain things that you just did right that led you to going from a agency style model to building? I mean, again, you make it kind of sound easy. Oh, I'll just build the website builder for you. But like, how did you get that right?
No, I don't know. I wish I knew, because I know, like, I know a bunch of agencies that have gone and tried to do similar things, and I know all those kind of like failed product ideas that I've seen other agencies do, and I don't know. Maybe it was like I had people willing to pay for it up front. I don't know what it was. Like, I know this like is like such a cop out answer, but I think I mean, there's always a little bit of luck in everything. And so I do think I just, got quite lucky. And there are times I mean, there's obviously many, many moments where I think that before we ever got funding, and like, when it was like a real grind, that it could have ended up being that way. But then, we got into Techstars, and that was like just the one thing that like kind of like went right. And then a bunch of other things started happening. But that took like 2.5 years, it wasn't like it happened like overnight. So, I don't have like, I don't know the thing.
I've heard you in other interviews or discussions talk about what you just said, which was like, I had people willing to pay for it up front.
Yeah.
Can you just explain the importance of that to you? Like what it was that you were looking for in the customer and their willingness to pay, or basically actually pay.
Yeah.
That kind of informed whether or not this was worth building or what to build. Just the importance of, hey, somebody's willing to pay for this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's everything. I think that, if you, maybe that's less obvious to some people, but I just think it's very, very obvious to me. I think that like, it's not a hobby. You're starting a business, which is supposed to make money. So you should charge for the thing, and you should make sure people can pay for it, and you should pay, a decent amount. I remember up front, like I remember when we were in Techstars, we were charging at least like we started at like $100 per month, kind of arbitrarily, but there was a few like data points we used. And in Techstars, they were like that, you get a lot of advice, but one main piece of advice was like, you need to make this cheaper. You need to have a freemium model. You need to, get more customers. You can get more customers. And it's just like, I was like, I don't know how this works cheaper. I just like, I'm like, I don't get like, I get what you're saying, but like, if it's going to be cheaper, they might as well just go like GoDaddy or Squarespace, the things that exist. It's just, and we just didn't do that because it made absolutely no sense to me. So I don't know. I think just, and I was also, I mean, I had worked at companies before, like it wasn't like my first job out of school. Like I think I understood, there was a little bit of experience, which I think like a little bit of business acumen, which I'd been working freelance. So I'd been like managing my own finances a little bit. So maybe that helped. But like, hey, it has to make money. Otherwise it doesn't really work.
I feel like I'm hearing you don't have an answer, and your answer is basically just your ethos, which is, like cheaper didn't make sense. Your comment about like, this is not a hobby. Resonates. So we actually wrote a blog post about how your startup is not a toy. But yeah, it sounds, just your general kind of philosophy around this is very refreshing. Like, hey, this is a business that has to make money. I love that.
Yeah,
seems so obvious.
I also think when people take capital too, I think there's like there is like I think people think it's like free money in some way, like it might fail, and the person who's giving me money knows it might fail. And so it's like pretty like risk free. So I think there's a lot of problems that come with that. But I always took like my commitment to taking that money very seriously and what it meant. And like, there was always going to be a return. Like it was very, important to me. Like, I think we had a really, we had a great outcome, but you could also see another path where it was like, we were at the height of the market. You should hold out. It only gets better. But like, I was like, this is a great, this is like delivering on the commitment to, everyone that owns a little piece of this company. And that was always really important.
I think it's a great segue to, we had some other things we'd love to discuss, but that notion of the exit.
Yeah.
And you got it right. Even though, you might have had voices in your ear saying, hold out longer. Can you walk us through that decision, or like what happened, how you never fully know, but you're like, hey, I think this is the right time. And meanwhile, there's probably many founders who didn't, make the decision that you did, and maybe now regret not making it. How did you come to the, I guess, like very mature realization that now might be the right time to get out, or, to figure out the next move for the business?
Yeah. Well, the thing was, is that it was always, sort of like always, obviously wanted to build a big business and, serve tons of restaurants, but the second that we took that outside capital, it was always in my mind that needed to become something. So, every time we did a round of funding, I would go and check the market and talk to all the potential places where we could like, add a lot of value, or we could continue to grow and take the company to the next level. And just, it was never just like, we're doing another round of funding. It was always kind of like, okay, there's like, what's the path now, like for the next stage of growth? And so, because that was just always happening at like a regular cadence, it wasn't like, okay, now is the time. We did a round of funding and spoke to various people, and ended up doing that round of funding. And then subsequently, one of the companies that we talked to, that we at that point started doing like developing a BD relationship with, became very interested, and just started showing a lot of interest. And I think it was because I had started building that relationship, keeping them in the loop as to like the direction we were going, and then had the relationships with the other potential partners, buyers at the time, that it was, when it came up opportunistically, it was easy to then turn it into something, a little bit more deliberate, and really explore like, okay, is now the right time? And and there's a lot of other factors of like, yes, there's a right time, but there's a right alignment, there's the right price, there's the right, what happens to the team, what happens to the product, and all of those things have to align. And they did very, very well in, working with Fiserv. So we're just very much aligned in terms of like the direction. So it was never like an end or like an exit. It was just like, okay, like where I want this company to grow and where I think it can add value, this will only speed it up. So
looking back at it, is there anything you would have changed about the exit? Or
no, nothing. There's obviously questions I wish I knew to ask, and like, but none of it's like, all of it's so minor in comparison.
What are some of those questions? Anything critical?
I mean, probably that, just like all the little things, just they're so very specific to just like how deals go that, you get so much advice, but like, it's just so based on like the nuances of the deal and the company and everything that, um, but no, I wouldn't have changed. I think it was, oh, I think it was very perfect in a lot of ways. And it was very much like we were really deep in the throes of figuring out like, okay, like restaurants post pandemic have become like hybrid, like digital businesses and like on premise businesses. And, these things need to come together. Like, how do we bridge the gap between digital, which we're really good at, and on prem, which we like kind of don't do a lot of, and Fiserv with Clover having this like on premise platform. It just, the strategic alignment was very, very high.
I sometimes think about like when you buy something, you ask all these questions up front, and then when you become the owner of it, you realize that there's all these things that you also should have asked about.
Yeah.
It sounds as though there were, like, I mean, if there was one piece of advice for founders out there today, considering, what sounds like was always in the back of your mind, which is, now that I've taken investment capital, at some point I have to figure out how to get to the exit. Is there anything, could be very basic or simple, that you'd encourage founders to, who own most of, own their businesses, but have investors to consider?
Sorry, can you ask the question
In
one
an
time?
exit, like the, related to the exit, any one piece of it, particular advice now that you've been through a successful one that they should just either consider, or the question they should ask, either of the partner or of themselves?
Yeah, well, it's going to be like a real massive, depending on how long you run the company for and what scale it's at and stuff, it's going to be and depending on what the buyer is like, well, let's say it's like, you're at a decent scale, and and the buyer is even much larger than that. It's going to be just like a different experience than you've had for the past like 10 or however many years that you've poured into it. It's going to be different, and you're not going to be in charge anymore in the way that you were. So I think it's just so important that like just that alignment is there, especially if you can plan to continue on, which, I fully did. Because it's going to be such a shift. But if you can just always go back to like, okay, now I'm doing this like bigger thing, and that's really important. And there is no way we would have been able to do it kind of like on our own. If you could always go back to that, then all the other stuff just feels like, small details. And you don't get like hung up on it. But then you don't have that alignment, and you have to deal with all this change. And usher your team through all this change and everything, that becomes like kind of untenable.
Mm-hmm.
That's when you start waking up on Mondays and being like, this is where, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I don't have that feeling.
There were a bunch, as we were preparing for this interview, I was thinking back on BentoBox. I remember we spoke to, some of your early customers, and there was a bunch of things that I felt like fell under the category of BentoBox strategy. And some of these, I think are right. Some of them maybe we romanticize. What I'm trying to understand is how many of these were intentional versus you kind of figured out along the way. And I distinctly remember one of them was this top-down approach as you entered new markets. Like you'd go after the top tier brand, and then the philosophy was from there, you'd have this kind of Me Too effect if everybody else would want it. Was that super intentional, or did you?
Yeah,
it was.
Yeah, that was very, very intentional. I mean, I think the first time we saw it happen, I think it probably wasn't intentional, like very early on, but like the first time we saw it happen was literally with our like very first customers. So, that was very intentional because restaurants are local businesses. They're ones that are like very much driven by communities and word of mouth. And, we had all kinds of structures set up internally around, we had defined like certain whales and like the top markets. And if you're a sales rep, like you would, get more for getting one of these. And it was like very, it was very, very intentional. And, we would just get proof points of this working constantly. I in support of this, I always like to tell the story of like, we've never really had an international strategy, but we ended up having a bunch of customers abroad. And it's like we would get one, remember in like Hong Kong, we got a customer just randomly. I think they probably were like fans of some of these New York restaurants we had. And then, within a year, we had like a couple dozen in Hong Kong, but no one was going after Hong Kong. It just like happened. And it was like an English speaking country. So it was like possible to like, we didn't have to modify our back end or anything. They could use our product pretty easily. But yeah, there's just so many examples of that kind of effect happening.
It must be difficult to convince businesses to drop their existing software. Usually it is, especially when you're going B2B. Did you experience that in any way, or were people pretty happy to let go of their current systems and switch over to this all new system of doing things?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it came to the websites, I think the timing was like really good, where there was like a wave of like restaurants becoming digital and wanting to upgrade their digital presence because diners were going to like a Yelp or like a TripAdvisor, like just the timing was right. So there was a lot of people like in the market at that time. I think like that's evolved. And then I think the same thing happened during like COVID and e-commerce. So I think small business sales is always very, very, very hard. It's like a real grind. But I think if you get the timing right at those like kind of like more macro inflection points, you get like some like tailwinds that kind of help move that along,
Another strategy question, and I think you hinted at this early on, but like it started with the website for the restaurant. And I guess we always thought that there was this Trojan horse concept. Hey, we get you on the website, but then there's all these other things that you find inside.
Mm-hmm.
Was that there from the get-go in your mind? Like, this isn't just about website building?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think that it was much more around like the digital presence and like, there's been such a focus on like the brick and mortar property, and now there's this digital property, and the website, is like the center of that, the same way like the POS is the center of like the on-premise, but it's really about like once you establish your own online presence, like all the other things that kind of fit into that. So yeah, it was a big part of the story.
How early on did you start? I think about a couple of our other businesses where we'd love to see them start becoming less of a cost center, more of a profit center for their customers.
Yeah.
How early on did you start building the kind of path to other products inside of BentoBox beyond the website that could move it from cost center to profit center? Was this like later in the game, or you had the core website builder and like in parallel you were building these other products?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had the core website builder, and that took some time to build and like actually like get out in the world. And I think throughout the next, let's say 5+ years that followed, we were incrementally like improving the website part of it, but then just introducing new products. It was very early on. I think it was like 2015. And we had like launched the first version of the platform at the very end of 2013. So we had like all of 2014 and most of 2015, where it was really early and we were bootstrapping. But towards the end of, no, it was the end of 2014. I'm sorry. So we'd been like bootstrapping it for like a year and a half. um, we introduced like gift cards. I remember that was like the first thing. And so we did like gift cards, and then I think we introduced maybe like catering and online ordering, and all the while that was happening, we're like continuing to build the website product, right? We're just like introducing new things. But the website was the hero product until basically like the pandemic.
Were you full-time working on this during that time, or were you still doing freelance other work?
In the bootstrap period, I was still doing a little bit of like work on the side, like kind of freelance type of stuff. But not a lot. It was like just like barely to like survive kind of stuff.
Was your
Like
co-founder
20%.
fully dedicated to this?
When we all became very fully dedicated to it when we got into like Techstars, but we were working on it the majority of the time. We didn't have like a salary, until Techstars. So
How did you find your co-founder, or how did you decide that that would be the right partner to pursue this business with?
we were both renting desks from like another larger agency, him as an engineer and me as kind of a designer, kind of working on our own things. And just got to know each other. And I told him, as this was coming up, I told him about it, and we just started working together on it.
So basically a co-working space is where you met your...
Yeah, it was
That's
an
really
official
cool.
co-working space, but yeah.
I was reading in a book a few days ago that some of the most successful companies, especially startups, are ones that have a short feedback loop between their customer and their product head or their building process. Did you have a feedback loop built in, or did you already sort of know from your prior experience with these companies what they would want as you were building on the additional stuff to the website?
Yeah, we didn't have like an official feedback loop, but I think again, going back to loving the industry that we're building for, so just having that like natural curiosity, or at least like me loving it, and then being very like design centric and therefore like people centric, and just being very attuned to like, it was never like what I wanted or what I thought would be cool. It was always like, what does the restaurant need? What do they want for their diners? What is the experience that they're trying to support through technology? What are the pain points that they're complaining about? So a lot of it was just natural feedback through, and I was interacting with like, all the customers in the beginning so much that I think you just hear same things kind of over and over again. And I think that like what the gift cards being like the first thing that we built outside the website, there was like this holiday thing that was happening. Like we were getting close to the end of the year, and we, noticed that gift cards were really important, and then also learned a lot about like why gift cards are important. Like you get that money up front, like they don't always get it all redeemed. Like there was just so much like, oh, there's so much benefit here. So, but then I think that ethos really permeated into when we finally got a head of product, ended up hiring someone that was very research, feedback, customer oriented, because that was had always been so important. And, he had established like more of an official feedback loop and official ways to like research and like, tools to use, and kind of codified everything that had been happening a little bit more naturally over the past however many years.
I always say now, when you listen to interviews with founders that have, built successful companies, oftentimes there's like these three themes that emerge. And I think you did them all. I don't know. You did it all up front, which is always make sure you hire great people. Often it comes out, I wish I had hired better people earlier on. I wish I had stayed closer to my customer. They pretty much told me all that I needed to know. and I wish I had raised more money. And it seems as though, like, for somebody who had just raised their last round of capital and then to already go into a potential acquisition discussion, you were in a position of strength and had negotiating leverage. And, it's not always obvious that, the best time to raise money is when you can, not when you have to. And it helps in negotiations when you've got plenty of cash and aligned investors on the balance sheet. So
yeah, it really does.
And now that you're, and I know there's plenty of challenges ahead, but like, BentoBox has gotten through what many founders hope to get through. Are there any crucible moments, or is there a crucible moment in the BentoBox story that you can share now that maybe you couldn't in the past? I feel like all good companies have this like moment of truth. Can you get past this? We're out of cash. We just lost it.
Yeah, I do remember before, we were doing Techstars, and the culmination, it is that, you do this demo day and you do your seed round, and we were, and it was all about getting a lead investor, and we were, that was proving to be harder for us at the time. And, I'd mentioned that we had just like started paying ourselves a salary, and then we had also brought on our first 2 full-time employees. So it was like 4 of us at the time. And it's interesting, those 2 people are still with us today, which just goes to the testament of like hiring these great people. But I remember we're like, oh man, we weren't going to make like payroll. It was like the 4 of us, and it wasn't like everything was going to end, but it was just like, oh, wow, this is like, we just blew through that so quickly, 3 months of like kind of this accelerator capital that we got. And I remember I said to Pierre, I was like, I think you and I just have to like skip this time, or the next 2 times, like we're just going to like skip, and then I'm going to figure it out. And we didn't have a lead investor, and that was just such a big deal. And then I just decided to like, just have like a note, like draft, like a convertible note drafted. Because we had gotten a few people that had said yes. It was probably something like small, like $50K in total, but it was like a couple different investors like putting in like $10K. And I just was like drafted a convertible note like based on a template, and was like, I'm just gonna close this. And and we're just gonna get the money in, and so we can like pay our bills. And then, but it did just take that like edge off, where like I think subsequently a few weeks later we got a lead, and I think that like just smell of desperation subsided, where it was able to happen, and probably wouldn't have like happened otherwise, and it would have just been like, okay, dead in the water at that moment. So
you think that became a smell that you never wanted to smell again?
Yeah, never. It's a terrible position to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're just at the hour here, and Krystle, there's been so much in here that I think our listeners will love. We love to end with these rapid fire questions, if we could, like top of mind response. Don't have to think too hard about it. Maybe Alara and I will go back and forth on these. So, best decision you've ever made professionally?
I mean, that's an easy one, right? Starting BentoBox. Is that are we allowed to say that, or is that too general? First thing that came to mind. Yeah, go ahead. What was the worst decision you've ever made? I don't know. Hard time. It must be something. I hired a friend once, which I regret.
Most difficult decision at BentoBox that you had to make?
Yeah. I don't think something came to mind, but I don't think I can talk about it.
Okay.
So,
too bad. I bet it's good.
Yeah.
What about some things that you'll always do again as a founder?
I think I would always just make sure that we, even though they felt maybe sometimes like a distraction, or, a little bit of like a frivolous use of capital, but the times when we had like, all day or multi-day company offsites were just they really, really paid off. They were really great. I think they were really defining moments and pivotal moments and really brought the team together.
And like, assume there's a future chapter where Krystle starts another company. One thing that you would just never do again, like going back in as a second-time founder.
I would never hire, I would never outsource marketing. I think before it felt right to spend money on marketing, we kept trying to dip our toes, whether it was paid marketing or press, and we would just hire like consultants or contractors, and it was just it never worked. It only started working when we brought it in-house.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it seems like you already have a lot of skills on your hand, but is there anything that you'd like to add when you are launching your next venture to yourself?
I'm having trouble thinking.
Like, you'd have to do no work, no studying, and all of a sudden you know some other thing.
The thing that keeps going in my mind, and I don't want to say because I think it's so lame, is like just know all of the spreadsheet shortcuts, to be able to like move through like formulas really quickly. I mean, I think I've gotten pretty good at navigating a spreadsheet, but sometimes you just want to like manipulate that data yourself, and not have to, depend on other people.
If you could go back, talk to 21-year-old Krystle, one piece of advice you'd give to her starting out her career?
Probably I would say like, you're more like fiscally savvy than you think or something, just, I think I thought I didn't really know much about, economics and finance and things, and that I would never like really get it enough to be able to like do anything meaningful. But I'd probably just be like, you're fine.
And if your next chapter had to be something totally different from anything that you've worked in before, like an industry or category, what would you do and why?
I probably want to be like a professional dancer. Because it's like,
what type of dance?
I don't know, like kind of like modern plus acrobatic something. Because I was a gymnast, and then I just, as I'm getting older, I'm just like, the time with my body is like, I just like watch your like friends and family getting older, and you start being like, oh, like this never used to hurt, but just knowing that like it's just being able to use your body in all these like ways, it's like a temple, and you should just like take advantage of it. And so for me, I feel like I was never a dancer. It just like feels like it would be fun.
I feel the same thing, and you start to wonder these ailments occasionally that you get. You're like, am I going to have this forever?
Yeah.
This go away?
Yeah.
Well, Krystle, Ilara, unless you have any other questions, thank you so much, Krystle. Really, really appreciate you carving out this time.
Thanks. This was so fun. And it was so good to like spend time with you all.
Likewise. Great seeing you. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Once again, my name is Ilara Dink, and I work with the team at TIA Ventures. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this interview on It's the People. If so, please visit our website where you can find more like this one. We also encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter, where we celebrate other stories of successful early-stage companies and founding teams and share their insights and secrets to success.